Hello, my name is Kian Monette, and I am a core team member of Juniata's chapter of It's On Us. Today is our first podcast, and I will be interviewing Dean and Title IX Coordinator Dan Cook-Huffman about Title IX on our campus. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, could you start by giving us just like a brief overview of like what is Title IX and what that means?
Sure. Excuse me. So my name's Dan Cook-Huffman. I'm the Associate Dean of Students and Title IX Coordinator at Juniata College currently. So a little bit of history of Title IX. Title IX is a federal law that was put into place in 1972, signed into law by President Richard M. Nixon at the time. And it is a law that requires that any recipient of federal dollars take steps to create an equitable and that those recipients of that federal money cannot discriminate on the basis of sex in the delivery of educational opportunities or other kinds of services that are provided by colleges and universities and secondary schools. I mean, it's a law that really goes through the public school system into college and universities as well. And it often has had a focus on things like equity in sports and other kinds of accessibility issues. But in the most recent years, there's been a big focus on making sure that we create learning environments that are free of sexual harassment and sexual violence, that also limit people's access to effective educational programming and to fully explore and utilize their educational opportunities. So that's in a nutshell what Title IX is about in terms of the broad philosophical part about what it should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, you're the current Title IX coordinator. Do you know who will be taking your place when you leave?
I do not know. I believe once I move on from the position that Matthew Damschroeder, the Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students, will be sort of a bridge person. So Matthew's very well trained in Title IX work as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk with him often, about cases and things, and he's a part of that process formally even. But I don't know what the plan is. I imagine they will have to designate, it's required by law that there has to be a designated Title IX coordinator. So I'm guessing that Matthew, or it doesn't have to just be one person also, it could be a combination of people who serve in that role.
Oh, okay.
But he would be one of them, and then possibly Tracy Grayuski, the Human Resources Director, who's also trained in Title IX. We also have other staff who have Title IX coordinator and Title IX investigator training. So we're very fortunate that we've had good training opportunities, and that we have had a lot of our staff, or several staff on campus who've been well trained in Title IX. And so, my hope is, and my expectation is, that Juniata will be able to carry on quite well.
Good. How will ongoing Title IX investigations be transferred to the next coordinator? Like, how's that going to work?
Sure. Well, we have a couple of different management systems for Title IX cases, or for any kind of conduct case. We use Basecamp, which is a sort of student case management online program.
Mm-hmm.
It's very secure, and also Maxient, which is a conduct online program, also very secure. And so any cases that exist currently will just be transferred to a new case manager.
Okay.
At that point.
Great.
Fortunately, I would like to say, since we've gone to remote learning these past several weeks, we have not received a single report of a a Title IX violation.
That's good.
And I've thought a lot about that. I doubt very much that that means everyone is making the best choices at all times, and no one is engaging in any harassment or other kinds of violations. Although I do think with social isolation, those direct contacts are much less frequent, and so it's more likely that there aren't those kinds of things. But I suspect that some of our students are still experiencing harassment and maybe even some forms of sexual violence wherever it is that they're located. And I would imagine that they're not reporting that to us because they don't see how we could be of help, since we're so many miles away and it's not happening on campus or something like that. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope no one's experiencing anything of that kind of nature, but I expect that, it's the real world and there may be some of that going on wherever students are located. And certainly, though, I would want students to know that we would do our best, even remotely, to offer you support and encouragement and guidance and options to address anything that you're dealing with, even if it's an online situation of harassment or something like that. So if you've looked at the announcements lately as well, and also on the website, the Juniata website, we've also assembled a lot of resources for students around interpersonal violence issues. The SPOT team has really worked very hard to get that information out to students, so that if students are, experiencing those things, even while they're in a remote learning environment, they still would have, access to those options and supports and information.
Yeah. And how can students get in contact with you if they do have any issues?
Absolutely. They can email me. They can also call me on my cell phone. My cell phone is 814-599-6888. They could send a text to that number as well. And then there are other staff that they could also get in contact with. They could contact Jesse Leonard, who's Assistant Dean for Conduct and also oversees public safety. Matthew Damschroeder, the VP for Student Life and Dean of Students. Tasia White, one of the Assistant Deans. Aaron Pascal, another Assistant Dean. Jody Althouse, of course, who's the Director of the SPOT. There are lots of people that they can contact for information and guidance. But yeah, I'm happy to hear from students about anything, but particularly if they have concerns or questions about Title IX, they can certainly contact me.
All right. So can you tell us a little bit more about what your job is as a Title IX coordinator?
Sure. So the job of the Title IX coordinator is to ensure ultimately that we have a campus climate that is free of harassment and that is aligned with Title IX initiatives. So one of the things I've done as Title IX coordinator is worked with other staff to collaborate on the Department of Justice grant and the It's On Us grant and the work at the SPOT and other initiatives, the men's group, other initiatives that I largely oversee or have responsibility for to make sure we are educating students, that we are training faculty and staff and students, and that everyone understands our expectations and what the guidelines are about how we treat one another, and to hopefully, reduce the amount of sexual harassment or interpersonal sexual violence on our campus. So, as Title IX coordinator, it's my job to pay attention to those and to make sure those educational opportunities are happening, that the trainings are happening every year for faculty, staff, coaches, students. And then, of course, I'm also in charge of the intake of cases that get reported, and then doing investigations and assigning investigators to cases, and then shepherding through those cases and processes to a resolution. And then, of course, keeping track of our statistics and making sure that we are reporting accurately through Cleary what our stats are and what's been happening on our campus.
Are those statistics available to students?
Absolutely. They're posted on our website.
Okay.
If you go to the Juniata website, you can find the Cleary stats on the annual security report. So I think if you just go to the website and then type in annual security report or type in public safety website, it's right on the front page of their website. And that by law includes the last 3 years of stats. That would include sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, and sexual harassment in general. Those things would be there, including liquor law violations and other kinds of things that happen on most campuses. Those stats are also compiled there and made available to the public by law on that website. And I'll make a note about that real quick. If you get our stats historically, we have had an increase in the number of reports of sexual violence in the last few years. And we expected that. And that is because that doesn't mean that all of a sudden there's been more harassment and sexual violence on Juniata's campus in the last few years. What it means is that together, students and faculty and staff have worked to create an environment where students feel safer to report. And so those reports are coming forward and those stats are being collected. We don't believe it means there's a big uptick in actual incidents, but that people are reporting and seeking services and seeking support and options about how to address it. And by bringing it out into the open in a report gives us the opportunity to address those things. So our hope is ultimately, with all the different initiatives and educational efforts we've put together the last few years, that the actual numbers are starting to go down or will go down over time, but that the reports are coming up, which means people are just feeling safer about reporting it and doing something about it.
Yeah. So what happens when someone reports a claim of sexual harassment or sexual assault or any type of violence?
Yes. Pardon me. Also on our webpage, you can find it's on the It's On Us page as well. Juniata's It's On Us page. You can find a flow chart that talks about how to report. So there are different ways you can report. You can report anonymously to Jody or chaplains or a counselor, or those employees who are confidential employees. You can report anonymously to them, and you will then have the availability of services and support and accommodations, and it will be included in the statistics, but it won't be a formal report that will result in an investigation or some kind of adjudication in the conduct system. That's one way. And some students choose to do that, and others choose to do a confidential or private report, and that ultimately comes to me, the Title IX coordinator, and I explore that. We'll ask both students to send me their statements about what happened from the parties that are involved. We'll assess that. We'll review it with each student, and then we will decide if it can be resolved sort of informally with the parties involved, if all are in agreement to try to do that. In more serious instances, of course, we send that immediately to investigators. We assign it to 2 investigators. They will explore it, pardon me, very thoroughly with all the parties or witnesses that are involved, and then they will make a recommendation. And the standard that they use is the preponderance of evidence, meaning is it more likely than not that this incident occurred as reported? And then after their finding, they will make a recommendation back to the Title IX coordinator about how we should address this situation, like what the sanction should be or what should happen. Then after that decision is implemented and both parties or all parties involved are equally and at the same and simultaneously informed of what the outcome is, then both parties or all parties also have the option to appeal that decision. And that appeal goes to the VP.
Okay.
And then after that appeal, that's the final decision, final result.
Mm-hmm. What does Juniata do while all of this is being resolved? Like, are there any options for students?
That's a good question. Yeah. So one of the things that happens once a report has come in formally and once we are beginning to gather information and statements from everyone, we also explore the possibility of interim measures, which means things that we can do that help the parties in the situation to manage their lives, to continue to access their educational opportunities and programs, and to feel safer as much as possible while the process is sort of going through. And so those include things like no contact orders, or sort of special arrangements so that one of the parties maybe eats lunch at a certain time, another party eats lunch at a different time, so they don't run into each other in the dining hall, for example. Of course, in the remote world we're in now, that's a moot point at the moment, but in normal times, that's how that works. Also, we can make arrangements for alternate housing if someone's going to feel safer being in a different location on campus. We can also make schedules work so that students aren't in the same classroom at the same time, or if they happen to be in a same class, we can explore options of making sure that they enter and leave the class at different times so that they won't run into each other in close contact, at the beginning or the end of the class. They can sit, in different areas of the classroom, and we can even inform the faculty member without any details or breaching confidentiality at all or privacy. But we can tell the faculty member, please just don't have those two students in a group together. Don't assign them a group work or something like that. And faculty are very good about understanding that and not making any assumptions, but following that guidance if we give that to them. So there's a number of things that can be done to help the parties, increase their level of comfort and safety while the process is unfolding. And those are referred to as interim measures.
Okay.
And some cases, can be resolved very quickly, and others, as you might imagine, can go on for many weeks, even depending on how many witnesses and how much difficulty you have scheduling meetings with everyone and getting all the details gathered in an investigation. Sometimes that takes more time than we want it to, but we do try to expeditiously move those cases through the process as quickly as possible, because it is very stressful on students, on both parties or all parties.
Yeah.
Of course.
How are the penalties determined for students if they're found to be if there is sexual assault or any
if they're
violence?
found to be responsible for something? Yeah. So typically if someone's found responsible for sexual assault, for a rape, they would be removed from the college. They would be suspended from the college, and that would be for at least as long as the other student is still a student. And in many cases, it wouldn't be welcome to return at all. That would be that's the highest level thing that we can do in Title IX, because Title IX is not a legal process. It's not a criminal process. It's a civil process.
Mm-hmm.
So the most we can do is to remove someone from the campus and not allow them to return. And we've done that in the most extreme cases, for sure. In other instances, as I mentioned before, there are no contact orders that are put in place permanently. Students might be required to take some kind of additional educational programming to understand what they did that was wrong. Students are put on probation, disciplinary probation. Sometimes that has restrictions, like they can't go to certain buildings or certain spaces, um, or they can't have interaction with certain students. But those are the kinds of things that are typical
Okay.
in these cases, yeah.
How is COVID-19 and like the current situation with social distancing and everything affecting the current any ongoing cases right now?
Yeah, so at the moment, we don't have too many open cases. So that's fortunate.
Yeah.
And so we are managing those at a distance. In some cases because of COVID. In other cases, we were already managing some of those at a distance because the students involved were not on campus this semester anyway. They were in internship or a study abroad or something like that. So we were managing those that way anyway. And that would just be typically by phone or by email. But as I said, fortunately, we have very few cases that we're managing right now. Things were pretty well resolved, before the COVID crisis emerged. And so it hasn't been a huge challenge to us. And in fact, it's been fairly seamless to just continue to resolve those things, by phone and email.
Well, those are all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Kian. It's great to talk to you, and I wish you well. And anyone out there listening, hang in there. This will pass, and we'll all be back together on campus again soon, we hope. But in the meantime, be safe, be well, and take care of one another.
That concludes our podcast for today. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode.